Carol Jackson Robinson became Catholic in 1940. She holds a B.A. from Wellesley and an M.A. in theology from St. John's University in Jamaica, New York. She was co-founder and co-editor of Integrity magazine and has had several books published by Sheed and Ward under the pseudonym of Peter Michaels. At the present time, she is devoting her leisure to study and writing. She says she spends her time reading the Fathers of the Church, and in particular, St. Thomas Aquinas. Mrs. Robinson has written some numerous articles for The Wanderer on St. Thomas, on the National Catechetical Directory, as well as taking to task the teaching of Father Raymond Brown, SS, and Father Richard McBrien. She participated in the 1974 forum, and it is an honor to introduce our speaker for the opening address at this 1975 forum, which is entitled, and you can check your programs on this, The Common Good and the Common Bad. Carol Jackson Robinson.
Dear friends of The Wanderer, in a recent talk, the Pope warned Catholics not to contribute to what he called the common ruin. Obviously, many Catholics are contributing to the common ruin, wittingly or unwittingly. We may even be doing so ourselves in this or that respect. It is an extremely difficult thing to avoid because of the lies and errors and confusion of our times. It is especially difficult in the field of social action, where so often we are offered alternate routes to the same bad end. I propose here to examine the difficulty on a metaphysical level and with the help of St. Thomas. For this we must first have a good look at the modern method of empirical science, because at about the time of the French Revolution, this method began to be used for the human sciences, of sociology especially. So let's take the case of an imaginary contemporary ornithologist. Let him be a conscientious scientist, a good man according to his lights, an atheist. This ornithologist knows all about birds from a phenomenological point of view. That is, from a descriptive angle, not an analytical one. He has all their characteristics rationally classified. Suppose we ask this man why birds fly, which is a philosophical question. The methods of modern science have rigorously excluded a priori the use of the philosophical intelligence, so he will not even have considered this matter, but the answer will seem obvious to him. Birds fly because they have wings. Why else? However, that is not the reason birds fly. It is the reason they can fly. The reason birds fly is that God, who made fish to live in the sea and animals to live on the land, willed, for the perfection of the order of the universe, also to make fowls to live in the air above the earth. For this reason he made the animals with wings that we call birds. If we explain this to our ornithologist, he will say it is a myth. There is no possible way in which he could arise from his studies to a consideration of this truth, since he does not even study the natures of birds. Moreover, he has a mentality which is now become quite general among us, to which such considerations are repugnant. He sees with his eyes and his cameras, not with his intellect. Very well, then, let's not press the matter. But surely we are entitled to ask the ornithologist, how come, if not for this purpose, birds happen to have wings? Here is where he will treat us to some real myths. He will tell us that evolution was busy evolving, trying this, trying that, when purely by chance she produced animals with flaps. Then these animals were set upon by predators, and flapping wildly in their efforts to escape, lo, they found themselves airborne. This chance event taught evolution the survival value of wings, and she gave birds the go-ahead signal to increase and multiply. Why did the ornithologist make up this story? Why didn't he just say he didn't know? The reason is because he has an intellect, even if he doesn't use it as he should. And it is of the very nature of our intellects that they have to know why, for what purpose. This is obvious enough. When small children are approaching the age of reason, they are forever asking, why, why, why? Very well, then, he had to have an explanation, and he had cut himself off from the true one, so he made one up. But why did he make this particular one up? Why does the whole modern world try to explain purpose as evolution, development, process, progress, and growth? The reason here is that all modern intellectuals, experts and scientists, are materialists. They may lead very austere lives, they may be dedicated, they may not love money, but they are materialists in the philosophical sense. They explain things in terms of material causality alone. The material cause of things considers only what things are made out of. Now, in the physical universe, which natural science considers, however unnaturally, this means bodies, examined in terms of their superficial characteristics. This bird is yellow, and how yellow compared to that bird? This child is 3 feet tall and getting taller. The characteristic of superficial characteristics is that they change, and that they generally change little by little. This kind of change is measured by time. Incidentally, substantial change is not measured by time. It takes place instantaneously. So if this is all you are considering, the phenomenological characteristics of things, the only principle of order you will be able to find is the time continuum, day after day, year after year, millennium after millennium. The time continuum, that earlier and this later, still does not explain the why of things. You have to invent reasons, like chance, the survival of the fittest, the trend toward democracy, or greater efficiency in economic production, to go with it. But since the time continuum is open-ended, you can always imagine that these successive changes work toward a future good hidden now from our eyes. Meanwhile, the time continuum can be used to set phenomena in some sort of order with respect to each other. And this can be a substitute for seeing real causality, or it can be entirely artificial and imaginary. The studies of our ornithologists are in the field of natural science, and philosophically this belongs to the order of being, of essences, of natures. However, by their materialism and their evolutionary myths, scientists have changed this order of being into an order of becoming, a continuous moving forward in time through change. They threw out the metaphysics of being only to substitute for it a counterfeit metaphysics of becoming. That's roughly why, when we get to the human order, we'll find them speaking of men not as rational animals, but as a something or other that is becoming a person. Why do I say something or other? A prominent Catholic philosopher, a layman who professes to be conservative, wrote recently of man as a rational body. This can only mean he thinks men are different from animals in degree, not in kind. They have more complex physical brains in their animal bodies. By this expression, he commits himself, in spite of his intentions, to forwarding the general ruin. As I said earlier, this empirical method, which Galileo and others worked out for the study of reality inferior to man, came to be used for the study of man himself, singly and collectively. The big names here are Hegel, Auguste Comte, Marx, and Freud. Later sociologists and psychologists are their disciples. In the human sciences, it is not the order of being that is perverted by materialism and evolutionary myths. It is the order of the good. God made all things for himself. to manifest his goodness. They came out from God in various sorts of created likenesses to him. They returned to God by moving toward his goodness as their own highest perfection, again in various ways. Precisely, the order of the good is the order of God's providence. Providence is the master plan in God's mind of the way in which he is going to direct all things in their return to him as their common good. The carrying out of this plan in time is called God's providential government. Creatures share in this government in various ways. We humans share in it through the social order. The social order consists of various patterns of human relationships serving their respective ends or common goods, to which the members of each organized group are directed by rulers and governors whose authority comes from the author of the whole providential plan. In metaphysical language, the order of divine providential government belongs to the order of final causality. God made all things to manifest his goodness. This they do not just by being, but by their proper activity, which is directed to him as their good. The definition of good is this: the good is what all things desire, insofar as they desire their own perfection. Created things do not return to God individually and alone, but in one great harmonious order. Neither do men go back to God alone, even in the natural temporal order. They return socially. Thus God is their common good. Recall now what we said about our ornithologist, that he rejects our explanation of the purpose of birds' activity in terms of final causality, which is the order of divine providence, and that he makes up myths about matter evolving through trial and error on a time continuum, advancing not toward some good or perfection, but toward an open-ended future. He rejected a metaphysically and theologically based final causality for a materialistic, made-up one. When this same method, so dogmatically materialistic, so resolutely limited to changing phenomena, was applied to human society, its difficulties were multiplied and compounded. Birds are existing things, substances. Never mind that scientists ignore this fact. The ornithologist dealt with them as such. He taught us nothing untrue about birds until he was goaded. He could ignore final causality in his work, but the social order is not a thing. It does not have a unity of existence and of substance, but a unity of order. Its only whatness is its purpose. It is, as they say, all final causality. So here is where his myth and our alleged myth clash head-on. The first principle of the ordering of human relationships in the social order is the end purpose, which has either to be the common good as we think, or perpetual material change as he thinks. Auguste Comte is the founder of modern sociology. Listen to him. He says, sociology is the study of the evolution of mankind. Final causality has no valid use or meaning in mechanics. What precisely is he saying? He is saying that evolution explains the human social order as well as the order of nature, that as the latter evolved through eons of past time, so our society is developing through historical time, feeling its way to higher forms of human relatedness, but without any end and first principle, just developing and changing by trial and error under the control of the sociologists, who with their more complex brains are adapting the empirical methods to human research and development. The method they are using on society is mechanical, technological. It is social engineering, guidance counseling. It is the new political science that Mr. Kissinger taught at Harvard and is now using to try to establish global peace. Emphatically, it has nothing to do with morality. Sociologists do not tell us where their methods will lead us. They say, "Come, we'll show you how to make your good marriage better, how to update the church. Above all, they are ready to show us how to make a more just world." We must not so much as listen to them, much less walk into their parlor, which is usually a workshop, a graduate school, or an encounter group. We must not let them rivet our attention on this or that pathetic situation, or real or imaginary social injustice. We must not cooperate with them in any way, not be commonly concerned about some matter they draw to our attention. There is one overriding reason why we must resist all their blandishments. They are substituting man's providence, man's craftsmanship and engineering for God's providence, and they are busy closing off every avenue of God's providential government. The number of Catholics, indeed the number of priests, who have already committed themselves to work for the common ruin in this way is frightening. I am morally certain that anyone who studies the social order with surveys, statistics, input, cybernetics, feedback, questionnaires, workshops, census cards, consciousness-raising sessions, systems analyses, models, role-playing, scenarios, computers, game plans, and barbarian words like personhood, humankind, lifestyle, encounter, response, self-image, interpersonal, and the rest will end up in a lunatic asylum or the communist camp, whichever comes first. And I am also morally certain that anyone who studies the church in this manner will lose his faith before you can say decision-making parish council. I have said that the order of the good is all purpose, all final cause, but of course it has to have a material cause too. The material cause of a social order is people, just people, prescinding from their relationships to each other. The material cause of the political society of the United States is people, the American people, everyone who lives in our country. Suppose now that everyone in the United States was Catholic. The material cause of the Catholic Church in the United States would be all the people in the United States. Call them the people of God, and they are nevertheless identical with the American people if all you look at is the material cause. The distinction between them is imaginary, like the distinction between me, myself, and I. Why then should there be two social orders, a political one and an ecclesiastical one? We would say it is because there are two common goods, two ends, one natural, one supernatural. The political society is responsible for the temporal common good of the citizens. It is supposed to direct them to their natural and human perfection so far as this can be done by law and order, and the church was established by Christ to bring men to their supernatural salvation. But for modern sociologists, there is not even one common good, one end that is external to the social order itself, let alone two. The only reason they have for a social organization is to hold things together in some sort of equilibrium for utilitarian purposes, whatever works. Besides, the religious organization, all those parishes, dioceses, priests, bishops, all that doctrine and discipline serves a myth. How then did it come about? Where did parishes, bishops, the Pope, and Revelation come from? Now they will invent some social myths based on historicism. Here's where Scripture scholars who take an historical approach to their theology, who go in for development of doctrine and scriptural criticism, are liable to fall into the soup. But what about the political social order? Where did that come from? This was a development, not a myth. Once we were ruled by tyrants called kings. That was when we were bound to the soil because we hadn't learned the secrets of the material universe and how to exploit it. Then we began to understand these secrets through the new science and its methods. Men everywhere revolted against kings and the laws that limited economic enterprise. Then came parliamentary government, working hand in glove with the capitalists and generating a revolution of the proletariat in its bosom. Finally, there was the democratic revolution, the new phase of which is the dictatorship of the proletariat. For atheistic materialists, the so-called humanists, Catholicism is not only a myth, it is an archaic myth. Its hierarchical structure was modeled on monarchy. As a first step to liquidating it, the structures must be democratized. St. Thomas has some interesting things to say about various kinds of government. He says that if rulers are virtuous, monarchy is the best form of government because it has more unity and so more strength. When several or more rule, they have first to come to agreement among themselves before they can impose their rule on the people. However, if the rulers are not virtuous, monarchy becomes tyranny and the worst of governments because of its strength. The king directs the people not to their common good, but to his personal profit or glory, his good. The best of the bad governments, the best government if those who govern are not virtuous, is the sort of popular democracy we have, because it is the weakest. It spreads the tyranny around. And men can never come to agreement with each other. But it is also the most vulnerable to outside enemies and internal subversion. Let us return now to the Pope's admonition. Catholics are warned not to contribute to the common ruin. Why then do they? I'm not concerned here with proximate and personal reasons. Is there any defect in their own philosophical suppositions that disposes them to this seduction? Yes, I think so. Now, according to St. Thomas and Aristotle, social order is chiefly the political order, and the science of politics is the highest part of moral theology. According to them also, moral theology is not sitting around deducing applications of the prohibitions of the Ten Commandments, or even chiefly studying natural law. It is studying the good and how to become good. It is studying the moral nature of man. In political science, it is the study of the common good. The common good is the first principle of all patterns of social relationships. The common good of a hospital is the healing of the sick, and the hospital is organized accordingly. The common good of a university is truth. The common good is always a universal truth, and it comes one way or another from God. We learn what it is. We do not set it up ourselves. We are drawn to God, our supreme common good, through these social orderings. So he wills them one way or another, and law and government have a positive moral function. They have so long been considered a restraint on man's sacred freedom that it is hard for men to think of them as good, and also hard for them to appreciate that communism is the nemesis of individualism. Keep in mind that in Catholic teaching, common goods are universal ends. The ends of communist planning are concrete and materialistic. That is why they see society as a collectivity of individual atoms, and the common good a sum total of each person's good. Our common good ends, being universal, diffuse their goodness on all who are united by them, and differently on different ones of them. But since the common goods are universal ends, they do not immediately move us to action. Only concrete intentions do that. For a whole social order or institution, there has to be someone who views the whole situation in the light of the common good and decides what concrete means are to be taken to achieve them. That is why we have rulers and parents and teachers and administrators. Their job is to deliberate about the means to be taken to the end of the common good, and to make laws or issue commands and rules that we are then morally obliged to obey. For all authority comes from God in this way. Here we see that the act of choice in moral affairs is always a choice of means, not ends. Free choice means free choice of means. It is by desiring the end and good that the reason is set to deliberating about the means. We sometimes hear people say that the dignity of man is his power to choose and his freedom to choose. If this freedom is not qualified by the necessity of first willing the end that we do not choose, in the personal moral order and in the social one, those who claim it may be saying we are free to choose ends, to make game plans, invent scenarios, select among models, and then afterwards to set up timetables for imposing these on society. If the end chosen is, for instance, to obtain a ceasefire in Vietnam before the November election, or obtain permission for voluntary celibacy of the clergy by 1976, then you are not free to choose the means. You are committed to use whatever means are necessary. And of course you cannot exclude immoral means. If you are determined to obtain zero population growth by the year 2000, then you have to do it as you can, by birth control, abortion, euthanasia. The end is not a moral one, so why should the means be moral? You are making an artificial society. The means are regarded as mechanical. Never mind that some people think they are moral. These people don't. You may have noticed that whenever we manage to do something that should retard the subversion of the church, it has the opposite effect. This is because the revolution can move slowly and quietly, only so long as the people do not realize what is happening. The greatest thing to be feared is that well-meaning people, who are after all in the majority, will be alarmed while there is still an opening for their resistance. So here is one reason Catholics fall into the soup. They think the act of choice is altogether free and not limited to means. The virtue that governs the choice of means is prudence. This is a derivative of providence. In a ruler, it is political prudence. The very word testifies to the fact that men share in God's providential government. This is because we are made in the image and likeness of God. The image is this, that like God, we act with a knowledge of the end for which we are acting. Like Him, we know the end and then determine the means. But we learn the end from God by revelation or philosophical study. We do not choose it. Neither does God choose the end. He could not make the world to manifest His goodness. He could have made another world to do it, though. Prudence is practical wisdom. We don't hear much about political prudence these days, or even ecclesiastical prudence. Theologians seem to have substituted something called social justice. I'm not sure what they mean by this. It is something different from justice as traditionally described, something that is partly like charity and partly open to the new confession of social sins in the progressivist penance services. However, I think it is slippery, and I think the main reason it is slippery is because justice is a virtue seated in the will. To replace the virtue of prudence, which is in the reason, with this virtue in the will, is to make it the directive virtue, is an open invitation to dictatorship. It can produce Hitlers and Cesar Chavez. It is responsible for that iron determination we find among the progressives. They never take no for an answer. They try and try again, and when they finally win a count, they declare the decision irreversible. They are building a new society. They are in the order of arts and craftiness. I have to mention the decision-making process. What is it but a mechanical substitute for the virtue of prudence? It is the main weapon of the new priests who are pretending to advise bishops, but are really taking over the management and transformation of their dioceses. This has been terribly philosophical. I cannot end this discussion without remarking that the ordinary person meets these philosophical transpositions on the semantic and grammatical level and must resist them there. Do not let anyone force you to make an active verb of the word to relate. Of the word relate. A key word, obviously, for we are dealing with human relationships. When the verb is used passively, as in, I am related to her, she is my sister, we acknowledge that the relationship is something we find ourselves having, and that it comes from God. But if we say, how does he relate to the pastor? Or let's gather together a group of strangers and see how we can make them relate to each other with planned paraliturgical worship experiences, we are already contributing to the common ruin. About the word peace. Everyone wants it, but some want real peace, and some a peace contrived by, mark this, political scientists who have no authority for trying to attain it. They can only wheel and deal with nuclear clout. The word communicate means to make known your thoughts. For the revolutionaries, it means either sexual intercourse or brainwashing. I'm not sure which. Anyhow, it is a togetherness they manipulate. Justice is the most abused word of all. Generally, the progressives use it to mean a leveling of all differences of sex, age, moral difference, intellectual difference, etc. But these differences are always lumped together with real injustices consequent on sin, extremes of wealth and poverty, for instance. They make you buy the whole package. Then we come to liberty. St. Thomas asks if the devil is head of all the wicked in the way that Christ is head of the mystical body. Sort of, he says. He is father of all the children of pride. He directs them by guile and lies to his good, which is the aversion of the rational creature from God. In order to make them think it is their common good, he calls it liberation.